Good evening, ladies, and welcome to the Youth Leaders Social Activism Forum, Educate to Lead. Our moderator and facilitator today will be Alice Wells. Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome everyone. We're so glad to have you here in our workshop this afternoon. Let me introduce our two presenters. Heidi Kuala is the founder and director of Refuge for the Refugees. Heidi has raised awareness regarding the status of refugees in Malaysia, as well as providing education for refugee children. Heidi donated English tuition to refugee children when she was just 18 years old. She then saved a school from being shut down with funds that she raised with her friends. She later taught the concept of microfinancing to children so they could become entrepreneurs. Refuge for Refugees is now 7 years old, and it supports and empowers 35 schools, 2 halfway homes, and 1 social business school, benefiting over 6,000 refugees across Malaysia and Myanmar. In 2017, the work that Heidi has done with the refugees was recognized by Queen Elizabeth II and was awarded the Queen's Young Leader Award. Congratulations, Heidi. Zamir Zulkifli is the managing director and co-founder of Teach for Malaysia. Zamir has his master's in mechanical engineering from Imperial College London and is passionate about education. He truly believes that Teach for Malaysia will be the nurturing ground for future leaders who will enhance Malaysia's educational landscape, and this is huge. In 2017, Zamir was named a winner of the EDGE Inspiring Young Leaders Award for his role as a visionary leader and frontline facilitator at Teach for Malaysia. Since its inception in 2009, Teach for Malaysia has recruited over 300 young Malaysians and has created an impact that has recruited over 300 young Malaysians and that has benefited up to 70,000 students. That's huge. Zamir says, and I love this quote, "Don't be afraid to dream your craziest dream. It is only in setting ambitious goals that we find ways to change the world," end quote. Please join me in welcoming Zamir and Heidi in this very interactive session on youth leaders and social activism. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Alice. Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, everyone. We're going to do a fairly simple session where we'll just share for about 5 or 10 minutes each and then open up to questions so that we have more time for questions and more time for engagement as well. So that's roughly going to be the format of the day. And just before we start, I want to say hello to Puan Elia, who's been a big supporter of Teach for Malaysia. So thank you so much for all your support over the years. Yeah, Heidi.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Really nice to meet all of you. It's been something that we've been talking about and planning towards for the past year or so. And it's nice. I mean, it's crazy how time flies. It's nice to finally be here. And I really, I'm so thankful for the opportunity to speak with you guys about youth in activism, mostly because a lot of my journey with Refuge to Refugees, to me it's quite special sharing the panel with Zamir today, because a lot of the work that Refuge to Refugees does now started from a moment where I got to go for a workshop with Teach for Malaysia and UNCR, and that's why the whole idea of, hey, if Teach for Malaysia is working towards making sure that access to good quality education is available to our local kids, why don't we set up something similar to target the refugee community and the stateless kids instead? Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to taking on this session with you guys.
Maybe you can share a bit about how you got started and what were some of the challenges and success to date, right? Like a 10-minute
Yeah.
session.
So I got started at about 17, 18 years old, right after secondary school. My best friend and I, her name is Andra, we decided to volunteer at a refugee school before we started college. I was studying college in April, and she was studying college in about August, and we had some time in between. A lot of friends were working in shopping malls and retail outlets and Starbucks outlets, and we decided that, like, hey, while that's great, being independent and earning money in that sense, we wanted to do something a bit more meaningful, a bit more impactful with our time. I grew up not too far away from here in this city called Petaling Jaya. It's an urban city like KL as well, and I went to a government school. The closest circle of friends I had were people that were representing school in one way or another. So they were debaters, they were public speakers, they were cheerleaders. And every day after school, we would gather in a canteen and talk about issues in our country. What the government wasn't doing enough, what these organizations are not doing enough, what people are not doing enough. And we get so riled up over current issues, right? But it's always about what other people are not doing enough. Until it's finally dawned on me. Here we are speaking about what others are not doing enough, but what are we doing? What are we doing about the issues that we are aware about? What are we doing with our access to education? What are we doing with our voice? So we started volunteering at the refugee school, really with a plan to stop volunteering once college started. But I remember, I think the moment for me was when I walked into the refugee school, 4 months into volunteering, just to tell them that, you know what, I start college next week and I need to focus on my studies, because that's what all Asian parents say, right? Like once you start school, focus on school. Everything else is not priority. And that's when the headmaster sat me down and told me, you know, Heidi, perfect timing. The school will be closed down due to lack of funds. So don't worry about coming back to teach. It's good, focus on your education. But there it dawned on me that there I was having access to higher education, something that I did not need to fight for, being born in an urban city. I did not come from a privileged family. I actually come from a really regular, average income family. My dad is the sole breadwinner in the family, so we are not a rich family in any way, but we have access to education, we have access to opportunities. But these kids were being robbed of their only access to education, and what are we going to do about it? So we told them, hey, hang on, just give us a couple of weeks. Let us try to raise funds for the school to get the school going for a bit more, and then we'll find for alternatives after. Soon after, I guess so we took it to, our first fundraising was a complete failure. We gathered a bunch of friends, we started baking, and we went house to house selling cookies and washing cars and cleaning gardens. And the end of 2 very long days, I think we only managed to raise about 90 ringgit. After managing all our costs. And we were just thinking like, hey, it's so much hard work to raise money. Like, money is hard to come. And so many people were just asking us, who are refugees? Who are these people you're helping? Does Malaysia even have refugees? And that's when we realized that there was such a lack of awareness. People wanted to help, people were supportive, but people did not know that Malaysia is home to 150,000 refugees and more. People did not know that refugees exist in Malaysia. People think that, when you think of refugee camps and where they stay, they expect, big empty lands with blue UNHCR tents, but they forget how it looks like when refugees are integrated into a city and they stay amongst you and I. So we started Refugees First as a project, and because of the need behind it, because there was an increasing need to raise more funds, educate more people, we decided to turn it around into a non-profit organization, just so that, projects are short-term, but with a non-profit organization, we can go much further. I remember being 17, almost 18, when the thought came about. So we made different calls, and the Registrar Societies Malaysia told us that, hey, in order for you to register an organization, you have to be at least 18 years old. So we waited till my birthday in May passed. I was the first one to celebrate my birthday in the year. So we waited till my birthday passed and we registered the organization. And today we are 7 years in, and we support about 35 schools across Malaysia and Myanmar, ensuring that these kids have access to not just education, but quality and formal education as well. So when they get resettled to countries like the US, to Australia, to New Zealand, to different places, they have a chance to education. They don't need to start from scratch once again. They can continue from where they've left off. Today we also run 2 homes for children who have lost their parents back home in the war. Kids whose parents are back home in Myanmar, kids whose parents didn't make it over with them, kids whose parents have passed away in detention centers. So we run 2 homes to provide equal opportunities for these children. And we also run a social business school. This is pretty new to us. It's mainly an idea that I was dabbling with about 2 years ago, when I asked myself, when you call yourself Refuge for the refugees, what does it mean? Are you truly providing a refuge for refugees? Or are you just providing the little things? Are you just raising awareness? Are you just doing a lot of talking? Are you providing a safe space? So this social business school, this refuge for refugees that we started, this safe space that we've started, is a little hub based in Sunway, where refugees can come by to receive access to mental health, where refugees can come by to get prenatal scans and vitamins, where refugees can come by for a mobile clinic, for a dental clinic. But more than that, they can come by to be seen as an equal. They can come by to be empowered with a skill like cooking, baking, sewing, barbering, barista training, just so that they can use their talents and their skills to put into action and tell people stories through the products that they make. So besides having, with all these 35 schools that we run, each of these schools has a sustainability factor tied to it, where these kids find ways to support themselves and support the school through fundraising, like baking. Some of them, they make this, Malaysians eat all the time, right? So whenever you sell some food-related stuff, it buys out really quickly. So we make cookies, we make sambal, a famous Malaysian chili paste, where you eat rice, bread, crackers, and everything else. And we've got a band of young refugee kids who go around performing songs in different cafes and restaurants that we bring them to. And that's really the gist of what we do with Refuge refugees. But on the side note, because you're working with refugees, I'm not too sure how many of you guys know about the refugee situation here in Malaysia. Malaysia is not a signatory of the Refugee Convention Protocol. So when refugees come to Malaysia, they don't have access to basic education. They don't have access to healthcare. They don't have access to job opportunities. Malaysia, there is close to 150,000 refugees registered in Malaysia, but there's so many more who have yet to have access to registration. Yet, transition period, if at all they get resettled, it's maybe 5 or 10-year wait, where they don't have access to basic human rights and basic opportunities here in Malaysia. So really, as an organization, we strive to provide them with that. We strive to provide them with an equal justice system in that sense, where they get as many opportunities as possible compared to a local child. And we strive to provide them a platform to be their own voice as well. I tell people that I can be going 7-8 years into doing this, and I can talk about the refugee situation, about what goes on behind the scenes, about how moms are so malnourished that they can't breastfeed their babies. I can go around telling people about how the families that I work with, the kids take turns to sleep in shifts at night simply because there's not enough space on the floor. But nothing compares to them coming here and telling you their stories instead. So that's what we're striving to do, giving them a platform to be empowered, to share their stories, and to be their own voice, to be a light for themselves, to be a light for their community, to step out of the shoes of being just a refugee and be able to stand and say, yes, I'm a refugee, but I see myself as an equal. And I believe that I deserve equal opportunities. I believe that I am allowed access to the right to education. And that's why when we give them the platform to say, yes, I deserve to be treated as equal, we see them step out of the shoes of a victim into the shoes of a winner. We see them strive for the very best. And today, a bunch of our kids, I just got news probably like a week ago, where 2 of our kids who first started school with us 7 years ago, now graduated as a valedictorian and the salutatorian in the US in high school, which is a huge deal for us, because they started with zero access to education. They started with not being able to speak a word of English. We've got a few other kids who are studying dentistry and medicine in the US as well. And we're so thankful that there are people back home in Malaysia supporting the work that we do, just so that when the kids get resettled, they have an equal chance, just like everyone else. Sorry, I'm taking up more than my 10 minutes, but yeah, this is what we do. Yeah.
Oh, such an amazing young lady. I think we met about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and the thought that ran through my mind was like, why didn't we get to recruit her? So it was a bittersweet experience, but glad that you've done so much in Refuge for the refugees. So quickly about Teach for Malaysia. We're part of a global network called Teach for All. And Alice actually has also recruited some Teach for America participants, so she's very familiar, of course, with the work in America. And Malaysia, just like Teach for America or any of the other Teach Fors, we're a locally driven independent organization. And we recruit top graduates or young professionals that show promising leadership potential. And we recruit them to teach for 2 years in underprivileged public schools. This typically serves low-income communities with around $1,000 a month household income or less. Typically, the household incomes that we serve are around $500 to $600 a month. So what we are going in as regular teachers for 2 years, and there is training before and during the service, so they're able to meet the standards and the requirements of the system. But it's just about bringing a different breed and a different type of thinking into an education space, and then working with the principals and the teachers there to realize some of the vision. The big challenges that we see working in an education system, the public education system, is that in Malaysia we have really great policies that are probably implemented well in maybe 10, 15 or 20% of the schools, but there's a larger proportion that's not getting the quality, especially if you look at low-income communities. So we're just trying to be that bridge in low-income communities. Some of our success stories, maybe a rural area in Selangor, which is about 2 hours out of here. Kids there grow up on paddy fields, and we run, on top of running the regular English, math, science, we also run some STEM and coding programs. And kids there were designing a device using Bluetooth technology to measure flooding in the paddy fields so that it gets sent over to their phones, right? And these were kids that were written off typically by schools or teachers. There's streaming in our education system, so they're sent towards the last class. And typically in the last class, teachers only come in and scold them for about 10 minutes and then get them to sit down for 5 minutes. And then 15 minutes later, lesson is over, and then repeat that process 7 times a day. So these opportunities that we give them, we believe that genius is equally distributed across the whole country or even the world, but opportunities are not. And this is probably, that's the work that we do, and over the last 8 or 9 years, the number is now actually 470 fellows and alumni. So I think I need to update that profile that went out. And we're quite proud of the alumni that we have. Around 35% of them stay on in the Ministry of Education as public school teachers. So they're climbing the ranks. But it takes about 20 years in Malaysia to be a principal. I know there's opportunities in the States that, Alice is a former principal. I'm sure you were there much faster after 20 years. Or was it? It was 20 years as well? Or it was faster? It was faster than 20 years, yeah. So how do you put people into leadership positions and then give them time to create that impact in the classroom is what we're advocating for a whole systemic change, because we believe there are structural and systemic challenges within the public education space. So 35 of our alumni is there, and then 40% are still in the education space, be it running STEM programs like what I shared, literacy programs, girl empowerment. We have access to tertiary education, vocational training. So you're suddenly finding young talent going in and trying to create that change. And once they understand what the challenges of the community, they're then able to take up and create new solutions. So coming back to the title, like Youth in Social Activism, what we find really powerful is similar to what Heidi mentioned, that many people don't know what the challenges in education are, in Malaysia at least. So the stats that we tell kids, or when we recruit in fancy universities or online, is that 1 in 5 Malaysian students do not complete secondary school. There's around 500 students going through the secondary every year that finishes secondary school. 100,000 students don't meet minimum requirements to get a high school certificate, right? And this is Malaysia, and we want to be a developed country. At least 2020 was the previous target. Now it's 2025. But that's the gap that we have. Our 14-year-olds are reading 3 years behind 14-year-olds in Singapore. I'm talking about the average. The likes of Heidi, the circles that I grew up in, and I was very privileged that I had a chance to go to a public, a private, and then an international school. Among us as friends, we were competing with each other, but we didn't realize that we were like the 1% or the 0.1% of the community as well, just because of all the privilege that we had. So that's broadly the work that I do. Maybe I'll touch a bit more on my personal journey as well, and then before we open up to questions. I mentioned I was very lucky to go to public, private, and in international schools. I was also very lucky that I was really good at remembering things and then answering it in exams. So I was good at answering questions at exams and typically got away with A's and B's. I had a younger brother, 2 years younger than me, who had ADHD and dyslexia, and he didn't have the same privilege of sitting down and asking the teachers like simple questions so that they felt good. He would challenge the teachers with really logical questions. Why does this happen? Why is that? And a curious mind, but he was labeled as naughty. He loved animals and plants, and so he had almost every single pet in the world that you can think of, from piranhas, budgies, scorpions, tortoises, snakes, the list goes on. Mom said, keep it in your room only, nothing in the house, but the snake got out a few times. But at one point at the international school, he was labeled that he wouldn't also pass high school with a full certificate, right? And mom and dad was just like, this is BS. Showed them a single finger, and then actually took him to a different school that believed in him. And because the school said actually he is possibly even borderline genius, they supported him through his education, and he actually passed high school in that 1 year with that school. And it was a big celebration in the family because everyone thought he was really going to fail high school, and we didn't know what was going to happen to him. Fast forward from that story, he is now around 33 years old or so, so that gives you a hint at my age. But he got a PhD from the University of Zurich to do environmental science at the age of 29. He is doing research into hardwood and endangered species in Sabah, in Borneo, and saving our rainforests as well, right? So there was a very, very close point where, I'm not talking about public school, I'm talking about an international school that could have labeled him as a failure, that he could have gone down a certain path, but because of my family and my parents, he went down a different path as well. So that just got me thinking about, number one, what should I do with my life? Because being an engineer and then becoming a consultant was not getting that much attention at home anymore. It used to, but then when brother was getting a PhD, he was the light of their apple suddenly. So that was a bit tricky. But So I decided education was my path, and I'm just hoping that I can find more kids like my brother out there as well, that could be doing wonderful things for the world. And if we talk about the UN Sustainable Goals, that's a big part of what we educate kids for. How can they solve those problems that we're facing? Yeah, I'll just stop there and I guess we'll open the floor for questions.
I have a couple of questions for you.
Right.
What's the biggest challenge? Thank you. What's the biggest challenge in engaging young people of the Selfie generation to social work? For both of you.
I think for me, the first challenge is actually getting brain space and mind space, right? They're overwhelmed with so many messages that's coming on a daily basis. How do we put forward that this problem is something that they should care about, education? So just accepting the fact of that we need to think of different ways to communicate the problem, but also accepting whoever we get that responds to that, like video or blog post or Facebook post, and then applies to join us, is exactly the kind of people that we want. So, but we select very carefully as well. But we're not trying to get everyone at the same time. We're just looking for pockets first. So start with small, low-hanging fruits. Don't try to scale too big, too fast. Keep it real. And then in the selection process, we are very, very careful with 3 competencies: perseverance, humility, and leadership. So we test for this carefully in the participants that we bring on board, because we invest a lot in the training. So we don't want to be training candidates that then drop out halfway. But if I had to choose what is the biggest challenge in that, I would say dealing with self-doubt. I find a surprising number of young people are really capable and competent, but they're filled with a lot of self-doubt. A lot of them question themselves and don't believe in themselves, and they feel like they have to always compete to win. But there's another way of being where we can collaborate and act as a collective that's not a competition all the time. Yeah.
Heidi, what has been your experience?
Yeah, I think Zamir so rightly wrapped it up. I think the biggest challenge in dealing with young people, engaging them in the social work, is dealing with self-doubt. I think growing up in the whole Asian context, if I may so rightly say, there's always expectation in that sense, right? Expectations from our parents, expectations from our family, that we're only successful if we work in a certain corporate company. For example, I've got 2 older siblings. My sister's 4 years older. My brother is a year older. But all 3 of us, not by our choice, were trained to become people that would eventually work in a Big 4, whether it's in Deloitte, whether it's in EY, Pricewaterhouse, to be an auditor, to be an accountant with the Big 4. That was the ultimate goal. That was the ultimate dream. That when it came to picking like university and college in that sense, or what we may study, it was almost, it wasn't quite, I love my parents and great intentions, right? But it wasn't our choice. It was more of like, hey, why don't you do your foundation in business, then degree in accounting, and then you end up working as an accountant, right? Because everyone needs accountants and auditors. Like you won't ever be out of a job in that sense. So I think like my biggest struggle in engaging with young people is trying to deal with the mindset they've been brought up with. That, a lot of times they think that success only looks a certain way. The way that they were brought up with, the way that their parents told them what success looks like. They think that in order to make a difference, a lot of us, we think that in order to make a difference, we need to have a lot of money, we need to have a lot of connections, we need to have quite a bit of credibility to back us up, just so that, whatever we say, there is backing behind it. But I always tell people that it's the heart and not the art. In that sense, you might have all the right skills and right talents that contributes towards the work. You might have, you might be great at fundraising. You might be great at convincing people. But if you run based on your knowledge, skills, and talents, you get burnt out really easily. But if you come in with the conviction that this is the right thing to do, with the assurance that you don't need to be anyone but you to make a difference, you don't need to have any talents, any skills, you just need to want to do good to be able to contribute. So it's just really harvesting that I think my biggest struggle is harvesting that, breaking the mindsets that they've been brought up with, and kind of speaking into that self-doubt and that many questions that they may have. Am I enough? Am I competent enough? Can I make enough of a difference? Will my 10 years of serving the country leave a dent? Or will it be, time wasted? Yeah.
Samir.
Yeah.
Want me to repeat the question?
Oh, I thought I answered it.
You did answer it? Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
No worries.
You're both shining stars. What motivates you to keep this going?
Yeah. So for me, it's actually, I think I touched on it earlier, my brother's story.
Yes.
And actually the understanding that story and how much it drove me probably only happened 2 years into Teach for Malaysia, as we were about to launch Teach for Malaysia. Before launching, there was no risk, right? It was like, okay, let's just fundraise, let's just get government approval, let's try to see if we can get 50 young people to sign up. But when you launch, you really then had to commit to the plan long term. And then I asked, why am I doing this, and what do I want to do in the long run? And it comes down to my brother's story, because a teacher had actually come up to me and told me, why can't your brother be more like you? And I was torn at that, because I wanted to be more like my brother. He was carefree. He'd be the kid that watched Jurassic Park and then pretended to live in a world where he was a velociraptor for 3 weeks, right? And he just had a lot of fun. And I felt I was on the opposite end. I was a bit I need to make sure everybody's happy. I need to make sure other people are happy first before I can take care of myself, or before I can have fun. Although I did have my fun, but it was I think a bit more controlled.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I just look at my younger brother as my inspiration on a day-to-day basis and what he's able to do now. And I just think, how many other kids don't have that opportunity? So it's what's the worst that could happen to me, right? If I fail in this, I can go back to one of the big fours. They gave me a job before. I hope they'll take me back in. Yeah. And if I can't, I don't know. I'm not worse off if anything goes wrong. So my motivation and what keeps me going is every single kid. And just yesterday, I was at a school visit, because I try to visit a school every 2 weeks to make sure I just stay connected. And there was this young boy who had first come in contact with us about 3 years ago. And he's probably scoring 80 to 90% on his English examinations on a school basis. But he said, I can't speak English. And his English was broken and he was struggling. And he was but because of this teacher, she's making me feel it's safe and it's okay to then learn English. And he was giving a presentation in broken English, but understandable. But it was just that confidence that you could see in him that made me go yep, this work is worth it. Yeah. And just keep on going. Yeah.
I think for me, it's a lot of understanding that my convictions needs to be stronger than my emotions. Because if I get to be real, in the past 7-8 years, I don't wake up every day inspired to fight the battle or to serve the refugee community. I don't wake up every day and going hey, let's do this, right? But I think it's understanding what my convictions are, what my values are, what my principles are, that conviction and the understanding that these refugee communities, these migrants, deserve an equal chance to education. They deserve equal opportunities. They deserve to be heard. And I think that's one thing that drives me every day. But more than that, it's also realizing that these kids I don't think we're giving them much as it is, But with the little that we're giving them, they are maximizing these opportunities, right? These kids are absolutely brilliant. They are resourceful. When we were teaching them English, when we first went in 7 years ago, they couldn't speak a word of English. So I had to learn the Burmese language and do a lot of drawings to explain to them, to teach them English. And because they soon started having a regular English teacher, they decided to go on YouTube to learn English as well, just to supplement what we're teaching in class. And I remember a couple of months after, this bunch of kids came into school speaking English with an American accent. And I go like, hey, where did that accent come from, right? Because you guys are Burmese in Malaysia. If anything, you should be picking up the Malaysian accent. But they're like, teacher, YouTube. YouTube teaches you a lot of things. So when you learn English from, probably a YouTuber that is from America, they learn the accent as well. And it's pretty funny because you go like, hey, you're not yet in Americas, but like you have that accent. But yeah, if that's one thing that keeps me going, it's just seeing the earnest desire of these kids to keep going on, to keep striving for more, to keep pushing the barriers, and seeing them slowly come out of their shells and believe that, like, just being able to have that conversation. A couple of weeks ago, I brought my kids to Publica for a music festival to perform. And as my kid took the mic, she was singing. She's a 16-year-old girl. She took the mic. You could see that her hands were shaking and her lips were trembling. But she looked at everyone that came to support and said, I just want to say that I am not just a refugee. We are not just refugees. Yes, we are refugees. And yes, this is our story. Yes, we are deeply hurt and deeply traumatized, but we are pretty much equals. And if you are here supporting us today, I hope that you see us through the lens of being an equal, just so that whatever we say, whatever we share, holds the same value as whenever someone else has picked up the mic. And I thought, like, her whole deliverance, her whole speech before they went to the performance, it was something that I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't something that we prepared her for. But just seeing her have the confidence to slowly say that, because they're used to going, oh, we're just a refugee, so we don't deserve opportunities. Oh, we're just refugees in the country, so we don't deserve. It's rightly so that we get treated like trash. But now you're at a place of going like, hey, look, we are not just refugees. We deserve equal opportunities. And just seeing my kids kind of come into that place of knowing their worth and knowing who they are, I think that keeps me going. Yeah.
One more question. Several more. What were 3 factors key to your success in scaling your efforts? Because you can't do everything all at once. So 3 factors in scaling your efforts to be successful. Heidi, why don't you start?
Yeah, Heidi starts first.
I think the 3 factors would be learning to ask for help. The first factor would be learning the power of collaboration and learning that it is not your battle to fight alone. I've realized that often a lot of us in the scene and in the work often get too caught up building. We go in for the community, for the people, to give help and support to communities in need, but we can get so caught up building the brand and the identity of the work that we forget our why. So I think the first thing is understanding the importance of collaboration and support and what it means to come together to serve a community. One main person that I learned this from is from Zamir, who has been teaching me a lot of what it means, right? While preparing for this session, we reconnected. We've always known of each other, and we've always, touched base here and there, saw each other at events. But only in the recent months that I've really had the opportunity to speak to Zamir, and he has imparted so many really important pearls of wisdom or like really important values that got me thinking. And I remember through one of our conversations that he was coaching me through, I remember just asking Zamir, like, why would you do this for me? I'm not from Teach for Malaysia. Why would you help me unpack and understand these leadership struggles? Because we're both the founders of our organization, so we both face similar struggles in that sense, similar questions. We grapple with the same issues to a certain extent. But not many, what I've realized is that not many founders in that sense will come together, sit together and unpack your different struggles as a leader leading a big organization or a successful organization or a growing organization. A lot of times the world works in such a competitive way where their best secrets are kept to themselves, right? So we do leadership talks, we tell you brief stuff as to like, but we don't get real with you. We don't go deep with you. But there is so much power in doing that. So number one, the power of collaboration, the power of asking for help, the power of coming together to support each other. I think that is key and very, very important. The second one would be knowing how to tell your story. Sorry. Yeah.
You're going to have to cut it a little bit
right,
shorter.
Sorry. Yeah, the second one would be knowing how to tell your story. I think a lot of times people want to help, people want to help, but they don't know how to help. So I think getting the word out is really important and engaging them. Only two comes to mind so far for now. Yeah.
Yeah. By pearls of wisdom also, I think Heidi is just like mainly the mistakes I've made so that she can avoid that. That's what I shared with her. To your question, Alice, for me, I think number one is mission. Keep the vision and mission at the forefront. That also means leave your ego at the door, right? This is not about the individual. This is about the mission and the beneficiaries, right? When working with people, individual ego gets in the way and then that breaks up things. Which then leads to number two, be clear about your values. So Teach Malaysia's values only 4 items: sense of possibility, excellence, collaboration, integrity. And I make sure I role model that, and I make sure my team members take it up. And if any moment I fail, I'm open to feedback. And someone had asked me, what's my biggest development program or the best training that I've ever received? It's constant feedback from my team every day. And that has pushed me to live into the values always. And it's acceptable to fall short, but it's not acceptable to say, no, you're not going to take it on and commit to it. And the third piece, vision, values. The third piece is, at least in my book, is have fun. Have fun doing very difficult work. So I kind of like grew up watching a lot of cartoon, Mowgli, Peter Pan, Neverland, King Arthur, Camelot. So I just have this dream that I want to create a space and an organization that lives into that, right? So I want to create a variation of Neverland, and we are all Peter Pans or lost boys or lost girls as well that are just not growing up. Yeah, that's mine.
Thank you. Heidi, regarding sustainability, how is Refuge for Refugees funded?
So the 35 schools that we run, most of these schools have a social business tied to it. We have a school that works on carpentry work, a school that bakes biscuits, where a school that does crocheting, and we sell it in shops, in malls, and bazaars. So a lot of these schools have a social factor tied to it, where these kids make items to sell. The kids who are involved in making the items get a bunch of the profit, where the rest goes back towards supporting the community. The rest goes back towards supporting the school. So that's really how we are mainly funded in that sense. We are still not a place where all schools are completely sustainable. So we work with a lot of embassies, a lot of grants to bring in the funds. Yeah.
Thank you. Zamir, do the Teach for Malaysia graduates volunteer for the 2 years? And if they're paid, where does your funding come from?
Yeah, they're paid. At least for us, we want to show a long-term career in education, so we want them to be committed to education for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And plus the graduates that we're looking for typically join a fancy law firm, an accounting firm. So we have to compete with that and then make sure their Asian parents are happy that they take the job, so they are paid. Thankfully, they are paid for by the Ministry of Education in Malaysia, and the salary is decent enough that it attracts top graduates. So a big chunk of our cost is taken care of because we're just complementing the Ministry of Education in their cost. But we also have costs that we incur in terms of like recruitment, training, and then fundraising cost. So about 20% comes from a government grant, 70% comes from corporate and institutional donations and philanthropy, and then 10% from individuals that donate about it's about $6 a month, helps us impact one student. So we also have individuals from that level and all the way to institutions. The sustainability question is always a tricky one. We're fairly unsustainable financially. We operate mainly with a 3 to 4 month cash in hand, and then we just see what happens. But for me, I think the important piece is the impact. So how once we do train up a participant after the 2 years, their impact is for the next 40 years. So for me, that's where the sustainability piece comes in as well.
Are your teachers certified?
Yes. We do it jointly with the Ministry of Education. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to get a salary as well. They get certified in the 2 years. Yeah.
Great. Heidi, a question for you. How do you ensure that children stay in a healthy and safe environment after being relocated? In other words, preventing human trafficking and work exploitation.
I wish there was a definite way I could answer this question by saying that this is what we do to ensure, because Malaysia is hub to human traffickers, right? But for us, there's a lot of educating the kids, bringing in people to run workshops, bringing organizations like PS Save the Children to get the kids to understand cybersecurity. Who are you speaking to online? Who are you meeting online? What does sexual grooming look like? What does grooming in person look like? We also screen through our volunteers very, very tightly. So when you want to volunteer with us or when you want to work with an organization, you go through a pretty stringent screening process. And we are also very, very closely engaged with our kids and the families. So we do a lot of, it's not just a teacher and a kid in that sense. We get to know their families personally. So when something alarming is happening, we get to know of it firsthand and then get to stop it. For example, the past week we've been dealing with this guy from Adelaide. He's about 65 years old, and he made his second visit to Malaysia last week to try to traffic 4 refugee girls over to Adelaide, promising them resettlement, promising them good education, promising them opportunity. This guy is 65 years old. In his 65 years, he's never left the country. His first ever visit out of the country is to Malaysia to meet 4 refugee girls that he spoke to online. Am I convinced that he's really here to help them? I'm not. Am I scared that he's here to do something nasty? Yes, I am. So right there and then, because the kids told us, hey, someone's helping us get resettled, then we have a casual conversation, we find out more, and then we engage the D11, we engage the Australian Police Task Force, we engage immigration to stop him at the borders, and to make sure that his time in Malaysia, he's being followed and he's being monitored closely every time he enters the country. Yeah. So that's really the few things that we do to stop or to try to make sure that it doesn't happen.
Thank you. Zamir, how did Teach for Malaysia begin? And what's the percentage of those who benefited who returned to give back?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we haven't had a student come back yet, but we have a few that have committed they would. And one of them is actually graduating not this year, but next July. So I'm really waiting for a student to become a participant. We did have like an indirect student from the same school, but not directly with the teacher. That's the closest that we've been. It started off in a conversation. eating, as usual, Malaysians. And we were just, again, complaining and wanting to do something in education. And a colleague and I were talking, and I actually said, if there was anything I would like to do in education, it would be like a Teach First, which is the UK equivalent, and Teach for America, that I'd like to start up. The funny story was when after graduating from engineering school, I applied to Teach First, and I got rejected. Yeah, it was the best. It was the best rejection for me because it was a real wake-up moment. I was rejected by a few other fancy consulting firms, but I wasn't so bothered by that rejection. But the rejection from Teach First hurt. And it was probably the first time, remember, it's so easy to get the A's and B's, so the first time I got rejected. And I was just like, there's something else here that I got to discover and unpack. But anyway, so it started from a conversation, and then we sent an email to the global network, Teach for All, which then said, oh, you're in luck. There's actually a group looking into starting up Teach for Malaysia. And they were based in the Ministry of Education as well as in the Prime Minister's department. So we had people already wanting to do it. But then the trouble was to convince them that to let us do it. Because the Malaysian system is very centralized, so they loved the idea so much that they wanted to do it. And that got me a bit more fired up in terms of like, if the government of Malaysia was running it, I don't think I would be so keen to join. So I was getting that message across, saying like, actually we'll be better at recruiting, we'll be better at training, we'll still work together, but let us run and let us have the autonomy to do it. And thankfully we had a few champions within the government that believed in us and that said like, okay, let's give this bunch of kids a go. I was only 26 or 27 at that point, zero education experience, and probably the only management experience I had was clicking on PowerPoint slides and writing minutes. So it was a big jump in that sense.
Here's a question for both of you. You're both doing amazing work. Did you have a time that you wanted to give up? And what was it? And how did you overcome that and move on?
You need to answer first.
Yeah, so many times. I think the most recent was early this year, only because the group that I started this organization with, we all finally graduated university, and we were all in this phase of entering the workforce in our early 20s, mid-20s. And suddenly I looked at my friends whom I started organization with, and they are consultants in companies. They do all these fancy office jobs, right? And I start asking myself, am I still living in that bubble of a young, passionate teenager wanting to make a difference? Do I still believe in the work? Because the pressure is real. It was easy. It was easier to do it when I didn't have responsibilities, when I was still a campus student, when I was still, it was easier to do it back then. But now, with all my friends taking on real jobs, with consultant firms, with companies, and getting great payrolls and pay slips, and every time we gather, they talk about stuff in a company that I can't quite link to. So there are times where I feel like giving up, where I feel that, is it really worth it? But I think I definitely, what I'm always pulled back by, what I've always pointed back to is what is my calling. And I'm very, very certain by now that no matter how bad the day is, my calling is to serve the refugee community. My calling is to make sure that they receive equal access to education. My calling is to see that their voices are heard. And I think a big breakthrough for me, so we always I mark it in a sense where if we get to play a role in changing the law, then we are making a difference. And last year, there was a big policy that came up by UNHCR saying that all Burmese refugees needs to go home to Myanmar by December 2019. We heard of the new cessation policy. We didn't agree with it, so we gathered a bunch of organizations to speak up against the cessation policy. And then in March this year, after the campaign that we were running launched, It went all the way to Geneva. It went all the way to Brussels. We got people to listen to interviews by refugees, and we got them involved in signing a petition. And in March this year, the cessation policy was reversed. And the United Nations decided that, you know what, they don't need to go back anymore. So I think it's times like that reminds me that what are your convictions? Stick by your convictions, stick by your convictions, not your emotions, because it's your convictions that will drive you to keep going even when you don't feel like it. Well said.
Zamir, what about you? A time you wanted to give up and you didn't, and what prevented that?
No, well, 2 days ago it crossed my mind, but it's a given. But I think as well, like whichever job you're in, you always feel like you want to do something else. But the biggest recent one, what happened on the 10th of May. So Teach Malaysia has been operating for about 8 years now, and we get approved for 4 years. So our next 4-year cycle, phase 3, is coming up for approval. So on 10th of May, we had a group of civil servants that had to come in and evaluate Teach Malaysia. And I always advocate there's no way you can put a number or put a presentation on Teach Malaysia that would make anyone believe it. You have to go to the community, you have to speak to the students, you have to speak to the teachers and the principals. But they didn't want to evaluate it that way, so they still wanted a presentation and some dry data. I'm all for data, but I don't think it gives the right picture sometimes. So what we did was we invited a principal, a teacher, a student to come and speak about their experience. And this principal probably said some of the sweetest and kindest things I've ever heard from working within the system. And she just basically said, look, these candidates that we bring in, they're young, they're dynamic, and they're passionate, and yes, they make mistakes. But what sets them apart is that they just have this sense of belief in the children, that the children can do amazing things. So it came to an example of English debate, and this particular school where this principal was from had never participated in an English debate before, and the teacher was like, okay, maybe we can just make it to 3rd place in the district. They won the district, won state, and then turned out 5th place nationally, right, for debate, and blew the principal away and blew other teachers away. But it became a lightning rod to work together. So as she was sharing this, the row of middle leader civil servants then started attacking her. Why is this possible? How can this happen? What do you mean? Were the kids? They were just like doubting the kids' own achievement, right? And it was just disappointing to then think that Teach Malaysia's next 4 years is going to be decided through this evaluation process. So going back on the 10th of May was very depressing. But thankfully, 9th of July, we then had a meeting with the Secretary General, who's the top civil servant, and he was bought in, and he approved the program to continue, and very easily as well. So sometimes you get a lot of resistance in certain places, and my rule of thumb is just escalate the issue upwards.
Will Malaysia ever provide education for refugees as a basic right? Equal to the citizens, rather than going voluntary humanitarian means? Your thoughts, your opinion?
I don't have an answer for sure. That's what we're definitely working towards, and that's what we're definitely advocating for. But I think we are very far off. There needs to be a lot more education and inclusivity in terms of just breaking the xenophobic mindset within communities, educating them about the difference. I think there was almost once where we started a conversation on bringing refugee kids into government schools because there's so many spaces in government schools, and that's when the Parent-Teacher Association stepped up and said that, hey, we don't think it's a good idea because these refugee kids might be a bad influence to our kids. And
it's probably the other way around, actually.
Yeah. So that's where the whole discussion stopped. I think that we are very close yet very far. I hope in my lifetime, I think in my lifetime it will happen, where refugees are given access to formal education in Malaysia, and we hope that with enough public awareness and enough education that we eventually will be able to allow refugees into formal education schools.
Thank you. How do we give hope to young scholars in the wake of lots of drug abuse and teenage pregnancies?
Wow. I think distract them and challenge them, right? So that's what we do in Teach Malaysia. We just show them actually is there a problem in the community that you want to work on? And then how do you want to solve it? So we provide training on identifying problems and then solving it. And then also we connect with corporates to fundraise and fund those initiatives. Some of them actually don't need much funding as well. One example is a group of 14-year-old kids in Sarawak or Borneo, this Miri. They wanted to solve the traffic problems in front of their school because there were shop houses, there were homes, there were apartments, and the flow was just really poor. So they ended up just running a survey, asking questions, and then holding a town hall to come up with solutions. And once that was done within the local community, they presented that to the local council. And when the local councillors who had them in front, they looked at first the adult in the room, the teacher, and the teacher said, "Oh, not me, it's the kids." So then the kids had to present, and it just floored the local councillors. So I think you just have to give kids, ask them what they want is, and normally drugs is, or even unprotected sex or teenage pregnancy, I suspect it's normally just because they don't have any other platform to express themselves.
Thank you. Aside from the children, how do we empower the parents, young adults who are refugees in Malaysia?
I think for us, it's providing them with vocational training skills. Actually, it's more like them providing us with vocational training skills. Because I mean, it's amazing. My office is right below one of the homes that we support. And every time there is a plumbing issue or there's an electrical issue, I'll go like, okay, let's call the plumber or let's call this guy to fix this electrical issue. And they go like, no, we can do it ourselves. So I feel that it's the other way around. I feel that we can support the parents by first giving them equal opportunities, educating them, not in terms of bringing them to school, but educating them as to what their rights are in Malaysia and who to speak to when something happens, and giving them a platform to express themselves through the products that they make. Because a lot of these parents are very, very, very talented, and they can tell their stories through the products that they make.
The UN 1957 Refugee Convention is restricting refugees' rights in Malaysia. Would signing the treaty improve the refugee situation in this country?
I think it will to a certain extent. I don't think that it's the one thing that will flip things over overnight. I can't say that it will, but I feel that signing the Refugee Convention Protocol will definitely help in so many ways. But it first starts with educating the communities as well, educating our top leaders as to who refugees are, how do we treat and respect refugees, educating our parents, how do we build a more inclusive communities in our schools, how do we include refugees, how do we include the stateless, how do we include the local urban poor into our circles. Because like it or not, we grew up in our circles, right? We grew up, if I grew up in PJ, it's only this circle of friends who are just like me that I'm exposed to, but I'm not exposed to people who are from different groups or different communities. So I think first it starts with building an inclusive community, then only whatever convention protocol that we sign will take into effect proper. I don't think that change can only happen if we sign the convention protocol. I think change can happen even without signing it. Yeah.
Great. What's the biggest challenge in engaging young people of the Selfie generation to social activism?
I think we had that question at the beginning. So,
what is the biggest challenge in engaging young people of the Selfie generation to social activism?
Yeah, I think that was the first question. We had answered that already.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
My apologies.
You were managing a lot of questions, so don't worry.
Yes. How do you find the balance between what you're doing and running an NGO?
You first. No? Oh. I think, well, the good news is that my NGO work is my full-time job. So I made sure I get paid to do my social work, right? So I'm not juggling 2 jobs. I don't think I'll be able to do that. I was a consultant in PwC. There wasn't much time
What's
to do
PwC?
PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Oh, yes.
Right? So there wasn't much time to do anything else if you work in PwC. So I made sure I fundraised and then was able to focus on Teach for Malaysia. I'm quite lucky now. I'm at the stage where I'm able to take on a larger portfolio, and I've actually started a second job with a foundation that gives out scholarships as well for needy kids. So I'm starting to diversify within the sector as well. So that's quite exciting for me professionally.
Yeah, right. Running the NGO is also my full-time job. So there isn't quite a juggle, but I do quite a bit of corporate trainings, which pays and which puts food on the table. I also consult. I'm also with the Queen's Trust. So I sit on board with the Queen's Jubilee Trust in London to look into alumni engagement programs, and that pays me as well. So I do certain things within the same field that earns an income, but this is basically my full-time job.
Perfect. Where would you both like to be 5 years from now?
5 years. Ideally, on a beach, but I'll need maybe a farm even. But I think professionally, I would like to be a senior civil servant position within the Ministry of Education, effecting change from inside and really dismantling a lot of internal barriers and structural barriers that are preventing learning for kids at scale. But just it's very easy for me to say that statement, but I think for it to be a reality in Malaysia is next to impossible. Because to join a civil service and to raise up the ranks, I should have applied when I was like probably 22 or 23. So there's no way in. There's no pathway for me to get in at this stage. So somewhere in the next 5 years, I'll have to lobby for the civil service to just change, and then I get a chance. So it's almost next to impossible. Yeah. But I'll figure something out.
Well, keep in mind, nothing is impossible.
Yeah.
Heidi, what about you?
I definitely hope to serve in the civil service as well, with the Ministry of Women, Welfare and Children, to put in place better laws and policies to protect the vulnerable community, especially the refugee women, the migrant women, and victims of human trafficking. I think that's something that I feel very strongly about.
Thank you. We only have about 4 minutes left. Is there a question any of you have that you would like to pose to our 2 panelists here? I want to thank them. I didn't see.
Do you guys want to just shout it out? Or?
Just come right up here. There's a microphone right up here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your words and your time. I am a teacher and I'm working as a volunteer teaching in a refugee school as well. So my recent concern has been how good of a job are we doing if we are not certified teachers? I have the luck to be a professional teacher. I'm a certified teacher, but my colleagues are not. So do you think that, both of you, do you think that having certified teachers, other than other volunteers that are maybe younger, have less experience, would that have a different impact in the outcome of the refugees as students? Because I heard from both of you that both your children are doing great and progressing very good, and that's really hopeful and empowering. So I'm just wondering do you think that it will make any difference if there were certified teachers working with your children?
Yeah, most definitely. I think it is definitely given that with certified teachers, the kids will be able to progress a lot more in education, only because when not everyone knows how to teach or how to teach effectively, I don't think I'm a good teacher. My colleagues usually tell me that, Heidi, you end up playing with the kids more than teaching them. So I go in and I give hugs to everyone and I give high fives. And then the teacher in the other class will be giving me the black eye for disrupting class in that sense. So I think definitely having certified teachers are really, really important. Though I think it's difficult to get certified teachers to teach refugee schools. Given in Malaysia, refugee schools, the ministry does not support refugees, so I think it's hard to get certified teachers to teach in refugee schools, and it'll definitely make your costs run a lot higher. Yeah.
Our time is up. I want to thank our two panelists for your passion, your conviction, and I think the state of education here in Malaysia is in very good hands, and I wish you both the very best of luck in your future. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Zamir. Thank you, Heidi. If you could just stay on stage very briefly, and we just want to give you a small token of appreciation. So ladies and gentlemen, ladies, if we can give them a round of applause for a wonderful panel and workshop. We'd like to present Alice Wells with a small gift of appreciation. And to Heidi, this is a letter of intention for Seroptimus International to pledge 1,500 ringgit to your organization. Thank you so much for being here. And Zamir, the same as well for Teach for Malaysia. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here.